Had an interesting but brief conversation with one of the members of our church yesterday. He was talking about a podcast he had listened to, and I believe it was an Anglican priest who was in the podcast. The guy was talking about the colonial period and the rise of Eastern mysticism here in the colonies versus the mentality in Europe. In Europe, Christianity was, more kind of, they had the idea that we were here to suffer in this earth, and Christianity was more of a way to overcome suffering, whereas when it came to the colonies, and the whole idea was about expansion, and so there was, here in the colonies, all of a sudden you had mystics and all sorts of different groups that began to spring out of there. And as I was talking, I was kind of reminded, here's a guy who's this podcaster is probably an Anglican priest, I believe. And and it is true that in Europe, England is part of Europe, in pre-colonial days, there was such suffering among Christians by other Christians. Of course, in the earliest days of Christianity, they were suffering under the Roman Empire, but then pretty soon the Roman Empire was taken over by Roman Catholicism, and Catholicism began to persecute anyone, even Christians, who weren't part of their system. And so to be a Christian and to follow the dictates of one's own conscience almost certainly meant that you were going to suffer. You were going to have to go through pain, and it was a matter of whether you were going to be faithful to your convictions or and suffer, or if you were going to compromise your convictions for ease in this world. And so 1,000 years, more than 1,500 years of that kind of mentality had created a kind of Christianity that almost required a person preach a suffering mentality. And then the believers began, or Christians began, and in Europe and England especially. So what happened is in the Church of England, all of a sudden you had people who were coming out of there, and you had the dissenters and the separatists, and you had some who were pietists, and you had Congregationalists. All of these groups that were really part of the Wesleyans, they were really part of the Anglican Church, the Methodists, part of the Anglican Church, and they began to move out of there, dissenting. And when that happened, all of a sudden there were great conflicts. Of course, there was conflict before that. There was conflict between the Catholics and the Anglicans. Thomas Cranmer, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was executed for his faith, which was really nothing more than he just wasn't a Catholic. And but then after Anglicanism became established, now there's people coming out of there seeing problems in there, and there's congregational churches, and there's separatist groups and pietist groups, and pietists who became the Quakers. Here in the United States, what happened is all of a sudden now you had we'd have the Puritans, the Puritans were known for their prune face, hard kind of Christianity. I think they get that from the suffering mentality. Pietists, who were part of the mysticism kind of thing, that Christianity ought to be something higher than this earth. And then there were Baptists, and I do not deny that some Baptists, some who claim the name Baptist, were part of that dissenter separatist movement, and they left Anglicanism, but Baptists existed long before that. And so what's happening is certain people came out. They knew that there were these Baptist people out there, and certain people came out of Anglicanism and just called themselves Baptists because that's who they knew were not part of Catholicism and not part of the Church of England. So all of that comes here to the United States, and now in the United States you've got the congregational churches, you got the Anglican churches, Episcopalian churches, and you've got the Puritans and the Pilgrims, and you've got some Baptists, and you've got some Quakers, some Dunkards, and some other, the Brethren coming out, all different experience of the same thing. But one of the things that happened here in the colonies of the United States of America was that all of a sudden a vision of the possibilities. There was land to be had, there was wealth to be gained, and that kind of mentality began to take hold in Christian thinking too. Christianity didn't have to necessarily be about just enduring suffering and kind of surviving this world without losing your faith, and a person could be a believer on this continent, be a believer and still succeed in the earth and have land and and build and develop. I think one of the things that happened is during the days of the American Revolution, the War for Independence, some Baptists were at first, at least my understanding, Baptists were at first opposed to it. But when they realized that the War for Independence was going to happen, then Baptists got involved in leadership, began speaking to those who were the powers that be, that eventually became the fathers of our country, and began to influence them. When they realized they had the ability to influence them, then all of a sudden Baptists who had never been historically had never been involved in government, all of a sudden began to see that there was possibility to be able to change their circumstances on this world through government influence. And we see that today in the United States, where almost Christianity, patriotism, and Christianity are almost married together. Almost, it's expected that if you're a godly Christian, then you are an American patriot at the same time. And all of that, I think, is a product of what happened with Baptists influencing the War for Independence. And then, and I won't remember the time frame. I think it was in the 1800s. There was a Baptist preacher, and I don't remember his name right now, but Gordon Crownwell, something like that, I believe it was. And he began to travel around preaching a message called "Acres of Diamonds." And where essentially what he was saying is it's the Christian responsibility, because of the way the opportunities that exist in the United States of America. It's kind of the Christian responsibility to work hard, become wealthy, so that then we can give that wealth and meet the needs of others in other parts, where we can glorify God by becoming wealthy. And so that even Baptists who would deny today the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel are still even a part of it. We see it in missions. God will bless, if you can't do anything else, give to missions, earn money and give lots to missions, and God will bless you for that. And, that's sort of a mentality.